not dumb anyway.
Hello, this is infant Glenn Ostland.
For the sake of this battery to run out, I will give you the talk I gave. Talk of the century!
In the fall of 1992, I was a missionary living in Matsue, Japan, with the two elders you're hearing in the background.
The missionary work is not progressing in this world, it's because of you.
They were crazy. I was not.
The missionaries bust their butts day in and day out, P-days included, to do what they can, and you.
They were irreverent and obnoxious. I was not.
You sit back, throw us a nashi now and then when we... What's a nashi? What's a nashi? Pear. Japanese pear, apple thing. Good.
President Utagawa, if you are listening to this now, I swear it was them all along, not me.
Throw us a nashi now and then when you think that...
Show off your double chin. Show off the double chin.
That's for your nashis. Your stupid nashis.
And today, I have one of those elders here to admit it all, right in front of everyone.
It's like a quarterback and a wide receiver. How do you pass for a touchdown when one of them is not pulling your shit? Scotty.
Elder Brad Phillips, oh, how far you sunk. And then rose, and then sunk all over again.
And for those of you that want to hear my Scotty imitation, wait for the skit. Oh, come on! Oh, Phil, did you kill me?
But he does do a pretty mean Darth Vader.
You're Japanese Darth Vader.
Japanese
Darth Vader, ladies and gentlemen. Here, let me hold mine. Japanese Darth Vader.
Okay.
He's gonna say, Ohio gozaimasu, Stormtrooper.
Good morning, Stormtrooper.
Yeah, those guys were just wrong. But not me. I should have been AP.
This is Infants on Thrones. The philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the core.
So yeah, this is kind of a treat for me. Today, I'm joined by Tom.
One of my ancestors is Joseph Allen Stout, who is brother of Hosea Stout, who is the Nauvoo chief of police.
Randy.
My great-grandpa, Frank Snyder, was a hobo.
And Jake.
My great-great-great-great-grandfather was Jesse N. Smith, who was the first cousin of Joseph Smith. And so there was that was a big thing kind of hanging over my head.
To discuss another listener-submitted essay, and this time, the listener is a guy I lived with for a couple of months on my mission. A great guy, a hilarious guy, and today he has an essay for us, which I titled for him on his behalf. You may eventually understand why. So take it away, Brad, with your essay, Dazed and Confirmed.
I don't think there was ever a time that I didn't really think of myself as LDS. Growing up, I remember sitting during family home evenings and listening to my father and my mother, for that matter, talk about our ancestors, 4 or 5 generations back that had been righteous enough to listen to the missionaries and to be baptized and to come to the States. They were the early settlers of Nauvoo. They crossed the plains and settled in Utah, and we were told from the time that we were kids, all of us, that we came from pioneer stock. We came from good, righteous people, and that the name that we bore and the heritage that we had was something to be proud of. In fact, whenever you'd be leaving the house, it was remember who you are and the name that you bear, and bear it well, to remind us to do what we should. The interesting thing is, as I got into high school, I didn't make the best choices. I was I was kind of a partier. I liked to kind of get out, and we got into a crowd where we would drink during high school. Lunch break. We'd go have a couple beers and come back to school, and really didn't care much about school. But that was always in the back of my mind. It was, boy, I'm letting somebody down somewhere. Largely, it pushed me into a double life, where on Sunday I was the Mormon youth that my parents probably always were proud about. During the week, I would kind of do my own thing, run with my friends, make whatever choices. And that was okay. It was always in the back of my head that I was going to serve a mission at 19. And after that, I'd go to some church school probably, and that would be, life would be easy in a concept. So I went on a wrestling scholarship to a nearby college. Fell in with a really rough crowd there. In fact, I was living in a house where I was the only non-convicted felon. At once upon a time, there was 6 of us, and 5 felons and me, and we had a great time. I think of kind of the blinders falling off of my eyes, as I'm seeing people, doing different, illicit drugs, booze was everywhere. We had a great time. I got into a little bit of the psychedelic scene, and, I haven't thought about them in a lot of years, but kind of funny stories about, seeing different things under the influence. I remember, standing, next to a mirror, trying to remember what side of the mirror I was on, or chit-chatting with John Lennon. Funny things happened. But, so I really came from a bad place. But, that whole time growing up, that thought that I would serve a mission, that thought that I had ancestors, that family pressure to do the right thing, ultimately, put me in a place where after that freshman year, I decided I would go on a mission. And largely that's where life started stacking up. I took me a little bit of extra time to really get right, with the church and all of that. A year later, I did receive a mission call to serve in Japan. And, that's where I met Glenn, actually. Glenn was in my first department. And, that was an interesting time, being with, some missionaries that had been out for a while, me being kind of new. It was kind of an easy way to kind of slide into the mission life, I guess. But, it was... I guess one of the big things to remember was that there was some jaded missionaries there that really, were kind of, negative on missionary, kind of the politics of everything. And I got a little bit jaded too, I guess. But after that, I kind of settled in, and I had a good mission. Did all the right things. On paper, I guess. My dad received, all the district leader, zone leader, trainer, notification letters, and he was very proud of his son. And, when I came back, I was really ready to be that Mormon elder that is in the script. Went to Rick's College. I had a great time. Being a return missionary at Rick's College when it was a 2-year school, you really were a man among boys. You just could date whoever you wanted. You were. You were validated. You were a made man in that area, and it was great. I served an internship, went to BYU Hawaii, where I met my wife, and graduated, took a job. And it was kind of interesting that, at that time, largely trying to do all that the church taught. I was married in the temple. My wife and I were both faithful saints. Starting to have kids, there wasn't contentment. And deep down, I would see things that would just bother me just a little bit, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but they would be things like, talking about people that weren't LDS, and it bothered me that we used the LDS church to validate. It's like, they could be really good people, but if they weren't Mormon, they're not quite good enough to date or to be with. They could be a sleazeball, but if they're LDS, that was better than a very good non-LDS. And that double culture, that double standard bothered me. And then you'd be in there talking about, movies that you saw, and if it was a rated R movie, you would get called out as, boy, you're living on the edge. And then they're telling you about some PG-13 movie that was equally crappy, if not a little bit worse. And I started really feeling like like the LDS Church in a lot of ways was like the old Jewish religion that would count how many steps you took on Sunday to determine whether you kept the Sabbath or not. It was more about the cultural principles than it really was the saving principles that seemed to start to matter. And that started me really thinking, how true can the church really be if we put so much pressure on things that really are neither here nor there in the big scheme of things, even the word of wisdom. So something that early on I'd kind of battled, and for a lot of years I'd kind of put it off. And battled, I say enjoyed is really what I mean. But I'm thinking, before Joseph Smith, there was millions of people that lived, millions of prophets that were righteous and did all those things. They're all in heaven, and I guarantee you they had wine. So where along the way in the last 150 years did things change where a glass of wine will keep you out of heaven? So I'm starting to stack these things together, and it doesn't feel, things don't add up. You hear God's eternal, things don't change. Well, the word of wisdom, kind of a new thing. Polygamy kind of came and went. Blacks, didn't have the priesthood. Now they do. And you start saying, well, is it truly from God or is it not? And finally, I just really couldn't do it anymore. And for me, it's a new decision. My wife and I, in the last couple months, have formally decided that we're done. We were less active for a lot of years, or at least the last couple. But we are done. I've told a couple of my siblings that, hey, it's not for me. And it's kind of funny. It's been a freeing conversation to say, look, I'm done with this. Last thing, I would think that my ancestors are proud of the decision I've made to do things for me, not to do things for anybody else. And I couldn't be more happy.
All right, well, let's get going then. So, I listened to your essay with my wife the other day, and she was just cracking up, Brad.
What part was so funny?
Oh boy, I think the first time she laughed really hard was when you mentioned that you were the only non-convicted felon in your apartment.
Yeah. And
then pretty quickly after that, when you said, we had so much fun, she was like cracking up.
So on that house, or where we, I guess it was an apartment, it's a duplex. We had pictures on the wall that were like hustler centerfolds, not like the tasteful Playboy centerfolds. They're the hustler ones where their
legs are spread. Yeah.
My dad came to visit me once. Beer cans everywhere. It was brutal. He's just looking, and he was, he was disappointed, maybe is the right word.
Disappointed? I'm surprised he didn't have a heart attack or...
Well, you see, the other part of it was I moved midway through the year because my parents were pestering me because I was only a half hour away. Didn't tell them, and this was pre-cell phone, pre-whatever, so they didn't know where I was at. I was off the grid. And so it was one of those things that when they finally found me, it was just like, hey, we got to, pull the prodigal son in. So anything I did was, that's okay, Brad. It was awesome.
It was awesome. So are you wanting to use your last name, or are you wanting to not? Because it's still the last name of your ancestors, and we don't want to sully their last name.
So it would kind of cheapen it if I said Jacob or whatever, some sort of like Brad Doe.
Yeah.
So how are you thinking about using it?
By saying Phillips.
Oh, so like phonetically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but like actually pronouncing it. Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, because like I don't, and I wanted to ask this to each one of the guys here, if you guys had the same kind of experience that Brad described about having to live up to your ancestors and like who they were, because like the five of us are sitting here having this conversation, we could have, like, our ancestors been like fighting over the same wife or something.
Very much. Or just shared them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, very, very, very possible. But they all could have been. Did you guys have answers to going back to Kirtland and Nauvoo?
Yeah. Well, in my case, I'm like My great-great-great-great-grandfather was Jesse N. Smith, who was the first cousin of Joseph Smith. And so that was a big thing kind of hanging over my head. It really helped break that illusion, though, when I found out that there was just a long, long chain and history of sexual abuse in my family.
Whoa.
So that kind of helped like crush that mentality of like living up to the perfect family name. But yeah, for a long time I had that hanging over my head.
Yeah, that's not something you want to keep going.
Yeah,
break the cycle.
Yeah, exactly. But
What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I was. One of my ancestors is Joseph Allen Stout, who was brother of Hosea Stout, who was the Nauvoo chief of police.
Wow.
Yeah, if that means anything at all. I mean, I've got Joseph Allen's journal that my dad passed along to me, and it's interesting. He actually talks about having his own doubts from time to time, but
what kind of
he always seen doubts in the authenticity. Like, am I doing the right thing? Is this all worth it? I don't know. And then the next morning he's like, so I started praying and to read my scriptures. He just kind of. It was like a weekly or daily shelf thing that he just kept throwing it on there. I was like, that was cool that he explored it, but he never let it entertain too long. It seemed like.
And what's the time frame? I mean, I guess this is Nauvoo. Is this like pre-martyrdom?
Pre-Mount Meadows, yeah. Pre-Mount
Meadows is
way
Nauvoo.
before Mount Meadows. We're talking Nauvoo, man.
So, hey, Randy, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the whole ancestry thing?
Well. My ancestry on my dad's side isn't proud. My great-grandpa Frank Snyder was a hobo, and he
was he a Mormon hobo?
No.
Oh,
he came from somewhere
awesome.
back east.
That'd be a great name for a podcast, the Mormon hobo.
He came from somewhere back east, rode the rails, and then at age 36 jumped off the rails in Salt Lake City, found my great-grandmother. Age 14, he's 36, and impregnated her.
Whoops.
And then had a few more kids and was a total alcoholic. Ended up on Skid Row in Ogden and died in a pauper's grave.
Wow.
So our genealogy stops with my great-grandpa Frank down that line because nobody knew where he was from.
Huh.
I still can't believe that he was an actual hobo that rode the rail lines. That's like the perfect stereotype of a hobo. That's perfect.
Hey, those guys still exist.
They do? Are you serious?
I'm dead. So okay. So we're not recording, right?
Oh no, we are. We've been recording for 15 minutes and 39 seconds.
Well, then I'll tell you a great story about hobos.
All right.
So I work in logistics for a lot of stuff we bring in by rail. And we've had incidents where hobos will you break open the seals to these tanker cars, that bring in like bulk sugar and things like that. And they will actually sleep on top of it because, they can turn it into little beds and stuff as it travels. And we've had to reject rail cars with broken seals because, hobos in there just making a nest in ingredients for, Cocoa Puffs and stuff.
That's my heritage.
Yeah,
I tell you. Yeah, you might be eating it for breakfast.
On my mom's side, I had much more closer to pioneer stock, but nobody that goes back to Nauvoo or Kirtland because on my mom's side, her ancestors converted in Denmark after they were already in Salt Lake and then immigrated. Wow. So they go back to like the 1850s. That Mormon stock, and they're proud of that. But on my wife's side, on her line, one of her ancestors was named John Solomon Fulmer. And if you guys know the story, the night before Joseph was killed, he had like a half dozen, maybe 14 of his closest followers, and they drank wine and sang hymns, read from the Book of Mormon.
Wine?
Yeah. Joseph had some wine smuggled in.
Wow.
And my wife's dad tells that story with pride. He doesn't, he's not ashamed of that fact at all. And then all of them were kind of swept away, ordered to leave, and all was left was John Taylor, Willard Richards, and Joseph Smith the next day where the martyrdom happened.
Wow.
So that's my wife's heritage.
Yeah. I had a guy in Nauvoo that was, I forget what his name is, Philemon C. Merrill. And that's on my mom's side. And he was, I think he was a Danite or a Danite. I would always mispronounce that.
Danite.
Yeah. And when I went to Nauvoo, I was able to find the tract of land. And we've got a journal of his, but I've never actually really bothered reading it. But he was a bodyguard of Joseph Smith, so I don't know if that was a Danite or just a legitimate bodyguard. And then
Go ahead.
And then Artemis Millet, who was the guy that designed the Kirtland Temple, the main architect for that, was on my grandfather's side. So,
see, we go into Vincent Knight as one of the guys that I guess he helped buy the land and some different things.
Yeah. So, and that was in Kirtland.
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
I think.
So you've got Kirtland ancestry. I've got Kirtland ancestry, and I think the other three guys are just losers. They just only go back to Nauvoo.
Yeah,
well, there you go. Our ancestors are bragging right now that we're on this podcast.
They totally are.
Exactly. Yeah. Those ancestors wouldn't even recognize the church today.
They would not.
Yeah, I don't think they'd be too happy with it, really.
For some reason, Glenn, I was thinking that you were related to someone that came through on the handcart company. Is that not you?
I mean, I probably do, but I don't know those stories.
Okay.
You're probably mixing me up with somebody else.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Cool. So did you guys get the same pressure that Brad did about living up to your ancestors? And like when you said this in your essay, remember who you are. I thought it was going to be like what you stand for or something like that. There's like that little trite quote, but it was more like a family saying that your name, that's what they would actually say to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of pride in the family with just the heritage of the name, and that was my parents were really proud of that, and they had this. They would tell us that when we die and go onto the other side, our ancestors that had that name would ask us if we bore that name honorably, if we did anything to soil the name, stain it, to bring disappointment on the family. It was a real thing. I mean, it was really viewed as it was this relic from the past that we would then pass on, and if you did anything to destroy the name, then you would have to answer for it.
Well, it is a relic from the past because that was the part of the Utah culture of Mormonism was the dynasty. It was all dynastic, and it seems like your parents have really overall the generations have hung on to that dynastic feeling, like you guys are part of the Ming dynasty.
Yeah.
Would they tell stories like at family home evening about ancestors and try to build familiarity and appreciation for your ancestors?
They would. So you would hear stories of the early conversions in Europe, miracles that happened where people were able to join the church. You would hear about sacrifice where they gave up all that they had to come and join the church wherever it was at. Weird tie-ins where my great-grandfather remembers Porter Rockwell and meeting him as a young boy when Porter was quite a bit older, and passing that along, and to the point where I have a cousin who named his son Porter after Porter Rockwell because of that tie. So my family was very focused on those little pieces and tying it all together.
Did you was it a big thing in your family? Because it was in a lot of families that I met with kind of this heritage thing where there would be some weird uncle that would always compile a book of journals or something like that. Did you ever have that? I mean, because I have like 3 different journal books and like a bunch of people.
You got 3 weird uncles, huh?
Yeah. I told you about the sexual abuse, right? I mean, they're the ones writing the books.
No, absolutely. I have an uncle who was a teacher, but he hasn't taught in 20 years, and he's really spent a lot of his energy researching family histories, compiling books. He's bound and published a couple of these books and given them out, and really tracks not just vertically up the family tree. He goes horizontally and will find different unique stories. And he's a little bit odd, but the kind of funny thing about him is he's probably one of the more progressive Mormons in my family. I mean, my dad was very old school to the point where he really believed that the 10 lost tribes would show up with new additional scripture, and they might climb out of a hole in the Arctic or come in from the moon. My dad really hadn't written those things off yet.
Wait, so you're saying that's not going to happen?
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
probably won't.
Is your dad still around?
He passed away 2 years ago.
Oh, all right. Okay. So, do any of your siblings still believe in that type of Mormonism, or did that kind of die out with your dad?
Actually, most of them do.
Yeah.
So my parents were fulfilled commandment and had 7 kids. And I have a younger brother who hasn't been active in 20 years. I have an older brother who is probably on the more progressive side. More moderate. He's not progressive. And then everybody else is as ultra conservative, as literal, the scripture is as literal as the print says it is. I mean, they take it right from the bottle.
Yeah.
right off they drink it right out of the tap.
Yes, they do.
Unfiltered Mormonism.
Yes.
Even the chunky parts that don't go down so well, they'll just swallow with a smile.
No artificial preservatives.
Mormonism, swallow with a smile.
Right. Got Mormonism?
As long as you swallow, that's all they care.
Sadly.
That wasn't a sexual reference. That's like seriously, like just believe. Just believe. Doesn't matter what we say.
Thanks for clarifying that, Randy.
I just didn't want people to think I'm always.
It's like you got this running disclaimer, like not everything I say is always sexually oriented. Just to let you guys know.
Yeah, not everything. Most things, but not everything. All right. So, I'll go ahead, Jake.
Well, I wanted to bring this up. I don't know if we're going to get to this later. If we are, apologize. But one thing that I noticed in the essay that I really liked, Brad, was like there's. I feel like the angst that you felt really played out in the way that you wrote the essay, because every time you describe these living a lifestyle that wasn't Mormonism, you'd start out saying, yeah, I made some bad choices, or I fell in with a rough crowd, or I wouldn't make the best choices. But then you'd immediately follow it up with, and we had a great time. It was fantastic. So, could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, do you still feel, that kind of ambivalence about the choices you were making? Or is that just something that you kind of put it behind you when you put Mormonism behind you? Does that make sense?
Maybe. When you say the ambivalence, help me understand kind of what you're seeking there.
I guess I just kind of used a word with several syllables and hoped that
it would land.
It would land. It didn't really. No, I mean,
I went to BYU Hawaii, not the Provo campus.
Right.
Oh, is there a difference?
You can wear sandals there.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess just the. Well, like that kind of, on one hand, feeling very angsty about, falling in with a quote unquote rough crowd, but then on the other hand, recognizing that you were having a good time and that it was something that you valued from a life experience, from a life experience perspective, I guess.
Well, it's just an interesting juxtaposition, because on the one hand, you're like, they weren't the best choices, but they were awesome.
Right.
And it's interesting. So I grew up, with this very traditional upbringing, family home evenings. It was, you're going to serve a mission. Didn't make any plans beyond that 19, because really that was really where life was going to start. And so it was, hey, just be a good kid, obey the commandments. But on the flip side, I was very curious. And my first beer that I ever had, I was probably 14 and a half. And I remember being, at this campground where there was other, kids my age, and I knew that they had beer. I asked for it. And they're like, hey, you sure you want this? I'm like, yeah, I want to, try this beer out. It was a Coors Light. It was the most horrible first beer ever. It was frothy and it was whatever. And I had to muscle it down, and they were kind of saying, hey, if you're going to drink this, you better drink it all, and I was like, sure, I'll do that. And I drank it down, and I remember not, it was just a horrible single beer, but it was kind of fun to be a part of that. I'm a natural extrovert. And so it wasn't so much the beer. It was this, being able to connect and have a good time, laugh and joke. And that was how I always associated it with. So, yeah, there was guilt at the same time. So I'm like, hey, great grandpa, whoever's looking at me, and I am letting him down. But, the moment was such a great time, and always was. I mean, that was the weird thing. And so naturally or just unfortunately, I end up compartmentalizing, and I just said, I've got two selves. I've got the one that does this and then the one that goes to church.
That's why you fell away. You never really...
Right, you're never all in.
Never really got it, man. No, I was actually the same way. I was a real buttoned up, tight, straight-laced Mormon all the way up until about my sophomore year in high school. And then all of a sudden, just the curiosity, because it was they make it such a forbidden fruit that it's
Absolutely.
like, what is the big deal? I had to know. I just had to know what the big deal was. And I already had mostly non-member friends. And so I've, finally got to one of their houses when we were sophomores where the parents just weren't around.
Right.
And they gave me a beer and I drank about half of it. Like you said, I tried to muscle through it. And then I went in the fridge and got a can of Kern's Nectar, which is like a fruit juice. And I mixed the beer with the Kern's Nectar just to choke it down.
That sounds horrible.
That's why you give everybody shit now about like girly drinks, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, now I drink straight whiskey. But the feelings that I had though was that it was always a thrill to hang out with my friends, do this thing that we weren't supposed to do, and it was fun. We eventually got into smoking pot, and that was even more fun. And then I'd go bless the sacrament or pass the sacrament on Sunday, and I would totally compartmentalize. But I didn't really ever feel guilty at the time.
So
until I had to make all my confessions and go on my mission, and I confessed of all that stuff. But it was just such a thrilling, exciting time for me.
Randy, I have to ask you this. So when I went through, and so you're living, you're having a good time, and then you're going to church on Sundays. There was a point where every 6 months you would have this PPI with the bishop, and where you'd have to sit down and kind of answer the questions. And it was a conscious decision. I'm going to stare that guy right in the eye, and I'm not going to blink. I am not going to show a sign of weakness. And it was my kind of way to kind of, I guess, handle, make sure that I wasn't given any signs that I was lying or not being fully disclosing things.
While you were lying.
While I was lying.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is anybody else feeling uncomfortable? Judas Priest, I'm feeling terribly uncomfortable.
Right now you are, Tom?
Yeah, because I didn't
go
through. Yeah, I'm gonna wash my hands or scrub my balls or something.
Perfect little Tommy Perry.
I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I didn't. I didn't do any of that
I'm
stuff.
with you, Tom.
Dude, I wasn't banging whores and blowing.
I didn't say you were banging whores. Come on, don't put words in my mouth, dude. Come on.
No, but I totally see what Tom is saying, because the thing is, the thought of even consuming alcohol or marijuana, are you fucking kidding me? Like, right. that was so far outside of like what was something that I'd be comfortable doing, that like it's just hard to imagine like being that extroverted. There's like a tiny part of me that's like jealous. It like kind of freaks me out, I guess, just thinking about it.
Well, and then you got a guy like Brad who walks up to his bishop full of demons that needs to be exorcised.
I don't think he was full of demons.
He stares his bishop down without a shred of conscience, saying, "I did nothing here, nothing to see here. Move along."
I did not have sex with that girl.
That just blows my mind, because I would walk in there thinking that the bishop could see right through me. Spirit of discernment, dude. He could see right through you. And I was like, I touched myself, but nothing happened. It won't happen again. I swear.
So you have to battle that spirit.
Wait, see, I'm right now, I'm just feeling terrible for the fact that like I was in there like weeks of being just crushed under this burden of like touching a boob, like, and just for weeks, and then finally going to my bishop and like coming clean and like having that experience when you guys were out there like smoking weed, and like it didn't even flinch. Like, I can't believe that.
Oh, I flinched a little bit, but boy, I brought my A game.
I'll tell you, like,
flinched a little bit.
What you guys are hearing right now, I heard from Brad when he was a green bean missionary, and he came into this apartment, and there was him and this guy Berbert, who had been my companion, and they were like cut from the same cloth. Where I had been more like Tom and Jake ahead of time, like in my youth, the worst things I did. I mean, we looked at like Playboy Channel or something over at my friend's house, but we'd like throw eggs out of moving cars. That was our straying as youth. But like touching alcohol or anything like that, I wouldn't do. And so Brad and Berbert, they're talking about the times that they dropped acid, and they're just like, and I'm like sitting there going, that sounds so cool, but I'm so glad I'm not them. I'm so glad that I'm like the righteous one in this apartment, and like my experience, and I always would like go back to Brad and Berbert as like a turning point in my mission where I became less judgmental about a certain type of missionary, because going into the mission field, I thought, if you're not going out there because you're going to convert the Japanese people or the people that you're going, you shouldn't be on your mission. That's the only legitimate reason to be on a mission. And as I got to know Brad and Berbert, I saw, and maybe I was wrong, Brad, but I interpreted that you guys were there because you had seen your life going in a direction that you didn't really want it to go in. And so the mission experience was like boot camp. It was a way of getting your life back on track. And after I got to know you guys and really enjoy hanging out with you guys, I'm like, I was kind of a dick for being judgmental earlier on. So, anyway.
Yeah, you guys.
I mean, I would say that was true, So I went to college and really was at the point where I was the only non-convicted felon in my apartment.
Right.
It makes you deal with really significant life choices. And, so did I have a testimony that the church was true? I don't know that I did, but I had a testimony that the life path I was on was wrong, and that didn't feel good. And so if what you're doing is wrong, then what's the opposite of all of that? Well, it feels like church. So it was more of a testimony that there's really bad things out there versus the church is really true. But I really went to try to do it as good as I could.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the guys that were like Glenn, the judgmental, self-righteous pricks that didn't ever do anything wrong, ended up being the political assholes out there on the mission that strive to become.
But I wasn't that guy.
Leader in AT.
And Glenn didn't strike me as that guy.
No. I was in recovery by the time I met Brad.
Yeah,
Glenn is in a population of one. He's just incredibly unique. But I think a lot of the other guys that were more black and white thinking. I don't think you've ever been black and white thinking. I think you've always kind of been contemplative and kind of like play devil's advocate just to stir up discussion. But
probably, but like there was a time on my mission, and I think Jake touched on this very well in his insecurity minisode, that like to me the measure of success was becoming AP. It was climbing up those ranks, and so like I was a senior companion after 4 months, and for Japan that was unheard of. Now it was co-senior with another guy from my district, so he was kind of at the same level that I was, which I didn't really like so much, because I was competitive and I wanted to be the good one, the best one, But I thought I'm on track, and then I became a district leader in about a year, and I thought, okay, pretty soon I'll be a zone leader, But I didn't play the games. This is when it started like unraveling for me, and I just saw the bullshit, and I saw like the guys that were politically ambitious, and I went, ooh, I really don't want to be that guy. And so I think the time that I transferred into the apartment, and were you there, Brad, when I transferred in? So you'd already been there a month. I think you had been there a month because you'd been with Gray, right?
Yeah, I was with Gray. Lampinen was my trainer.
Oh, okay. I don't even remember that guy.
Yeah, I can tell you some funny stories about him, but Gray was my current companion, and you replaced, I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't. I just remember I became companions with Berbert, and it was like, for me, it was a demotion as far as like the hierarchy went, because I had been a district leader, and then I went into this place where I wasn't a district leader anymore. And so, like, I was kind of disappointed and jaded at that point. Like, was I one of the jaded ones that you talked about in your essay?
No, you weren't.
Okay.
And so it was kind of interesting. So I come right from the MTC programming, and then I come into this apartment where Lampinen was getting ready. He went home. Gray came in. He was almost ready to go home. Berbert, and you were both on your downside. So, it was this. The apartment had kind of evolved past. There's no politics. You guys were kind of just wanting to go out.
Yeah.
But I won't say it was trunky at all, but it was definitely willingness to listen to music and do some things. And so for me, I had this little personal mini crisis. It was like, wow, that's not what they were told. And I was told to make sure that if I have these companions that weren't doing what they're supposed to, I was supposed to challenge them. But I'm thinking, I'm the new guy here. I'm not going to do that. So I kind of went along with it. And, and in a way it was kind of good because it was a way to kind of ease into it as well.
When you say it, you mean missionary life, from the transition from the MTC?
Right. Okay. Exactly. I mean, it's the full-on immersion, and it's a challenging time. So, serving in Japan for me, being very extroverted, so you go right to this place where you couldn't even speak the language. You're falling around this companion. You'd have this meet, and it'd be like 2 hours of just gibberish you don't understand. And so you would write down words and look them up in your dictionary, trying to learn. Yeah. And I didn't even have the ear for it. So I'd pick up the second part of one word, the first part of another word, think it's a word.
You were the only one.
Couldn't find it in my dictionary, and so I'd fall asleep in these meets. I had, I dreaded the missionary work because it was this life of solitude as my very fluent companion could engage, and then I could break out these goofy little sentences, then not even understand the response. That was tough, and so when I was in this apartment where people, were a little bit less intense about getting out and proselyting every day, I enjoyed that and found some strength. And then Glenn, I don't know if he's told you guys this, was also a practical joker. And so in the evenings, we would call different zone leaders and say certain things to them. Believe it or not, I found the cassette.
You got it?
That.
Oh my gosh!
I think I threw it away right before the move, like 3 months ago. But I had the recordings.
I think I've got one of them somewhere. So, like Brad mentioned in his essay that there were people that were jaded about mission politics, and maybe he doesn't remember me as being one of them, but I definitely was. And there was one guy in particular.
Probably were jaded in Japanese, and I didn't understand it.
Maybe that's what it was. But there was one guy that he had aspirations for AP written all over him, and he was a zone leader in a different zone. And so we convinced Brad to call him up and pretend that he was just some anonymous mission in his zone and that he was having problems with masturbation. But it wasn't even really masturbation, right? It was it was like wet dreams.
Muse.
And then we recorded the whole thing, and then we just listened to it afterwards and laughed. So,
yes.
Nobody else thinks this is funny, Brad.
No.
How about the time that you and Berbert went to go see Basic Instinct?
That.
All right, we got Tom.
Yeah, that was
wait, did that really happen?
Dude, that's even beyond what I did. I didn't do anything that crazy.
Yeah.
Yes. So we did, and the spirit of full disclosure, so we did. We didn't know, so we didn't see any of the previews. Didn't know it was that intense or graphic. So we
Come on, you saw the R rating. Come on.
Well, there's Last of the Mohicans was rated R, but. So, the funny thing is it eventually leaked out. I don't know how it did, but then the mission president was asking me personally. He's like, "Did you go see a movie?" I'm like, "Yes, I did." And he says, "What kind of movie was it?" And I think he was angling for. Was it graphic or anything? And I was like, "Oh, it was a suspense thriller."
No, that's not what you said.
What did I say?
You said it was a Michael Douglas movie.
And you looked back and said, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's like, "What kind of movie was it?" "A Michael Douglas movie." And he was Japanese. He had no idea. He had no context for it. So he was like, "Okay, all right." And that was that. Yeah. The other thing I remember when the sister missionaries were one of them was getting ready to transfer, and you and Berbert went over there and had like a little party with them. And I think it was just the three of us at that point for some reason. And I stayed at the apartment all by myself, and I just thought, You guys were horrible because you were going into the apartment of the sister missionaries. You're not supposed to go. And then I heard afterwards you guys did like a sword fight in the bathroom.
Yes, we did.
Wait, is that a literal sword fight?
Yeah, well, yeah, with our lightsabers.
They crossed streams. Like in Ghostbusters.
Got it.
Yeah.
The Schwartz. Hey, so on that, I got to ask you this.
Yeah.
So you were there when I had Hasagawa as my companion.
Okay.
Were you there when I had Yoji Hasagawa? Who replaced Gray? And the dude showed up, slept in my futon because his stuff hadn't shown up yet. He had the bad back, rode my bike, and made me run next to him. I hated him.
I remember he was the younger brother of one of my earlier companions, Hasagawa. But he didn't. What happened? Did he transfer out after a week or two? Is that why there was just the three of us?
Yes, he had back issues and eventually had to go back to the mission home. And then it was the three of us, and then one of the assistants came out and finished out that stretch.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, wait a minute. Didn't you say you were a college wrestler and you let this little guy boss you around and ride a bike while you ran like a slave?
Well, he wasn't a little guy. He was built like a sumo wrestler.
Yeah, he was.
And then I had no language. I was I couldn't even speak to him hardly. And he would just I'd just come in and he's sleeping in my bed.
Yeah, I do remember that. You were miserable. You were so miserable because you couldn't communicate with him and he didn't give a shit.
He did not give a shit. Yeah. And the only Japanese companion I ever had, and the dude, I'd just come in and he's sleeping in my bed. I'm like, really? And then we go downstairs, he'd get on my bike, and then he wouldn't even ride slow. He's like, I can't walk because of my back. Or somebody translate that to me, and he'd take off riding. Here I'm jogging next to him. I'm just like, what a asshole.
What an asshole. That's terrible.
Yeah. Probably not the only time in my life I've taken that much shit.
All right, so let me ask this follow-up to the essay, because Brad, you seem like this happy-go-lucky guy that hasn't endured any trauma whatsoever from leaving the church, and that's where the disconnection from me comes in. And I guess this is kind of a follow-up to Jake's question, but you seem to imply that you didn't really have a testimony. You did the mission thing because you didn't like where your life was going, but at any point did you start to pray on your own and really believe and read the scriptures in private
yes
and you
so here I'll connect those dots for you. So it was probably right after Glenn had transferred out, and one of the things my mission president said, really coming out of that really rough first department, was he says, Elder Phillips, if you're not here to be a missionary, we can send you home now. Or you can make some decisions and be here. It's too early in your mission to be battling these things.
Shape up or ship out, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And that kind of stuck. And so I got transferred down to Yamaguchi, and it was another city. I got a companion who was pretty straight-laced. And on that transfer, I remember, sitting there. Glenn, do you remember I had those turtles? I had those two turtles. Yeah. So I had my turtles with me, and I remember just sitting there thinking, boy, I've come too far to go home now. And so when I got there, I started this thing where I'd get up at 4:45 every morning, well before everybody else, shower, put on my suit and tie, do my personal scripture study, do all those things. And it was just, everybody in that apartment, they'd probably heard stories. I'm sure, the mission president, AP, said, hey, this guy's a problem character. But I was out of the gate as straight-laced as I could be. And, after a month or two of that, I got transferred out and was made senior, and it was, they were just, that was the only Elder Phillips they knew, was this very, there's my last name. So there you go. That was that was the only version of me that they knew, and that stuck. I mean, I did the prayer. I built the testimony. I invested. I was, I never got caught up in a lot of the goofiness because I really wanted to be there for the right reasons, but it did stick. And when I came out of my mission, went to Rick's College, was still, really trying to do the right things. And I had cousins that would just laugh at me because I was I dare not use the phrase Peter Priesthood, but I was very straight-laced, very focused, and really trying to do it right. So there was a point in my life that I was really had those convictions. And the reason it feels like I'm so, maybe flippant about it now is that, it's been 10 years that I've been becoming gradually more and more disaffected, and so now when I say, hey, I'm kind of done, and it's a recent thing, in a lot of ways that's been a very slow but steady progression.
So, I remember when we first reconnected after the mission, and I'm really kind of secretly hoping that it was about 10 years ago, but I don't know for sure. I just remember hearing like what your trajectory was like after that area, and being a little disappointed.
In which way?
Being a little disappointed that you like modged up, that you got all like straight laced and everything like that. I thought, oh man, because I don't know, it just disappointed because you were so fun.
Well, and so I had the fear of the Almighty in me. I did not want to go home, and I got into it. But I will say that we had fun along the way. There were times that we snuck out to do, New Year's Shogots, at midnight at the shrine, which was against the rules. We even as zone leader, we would cut out and it'd be like, hey, zone day, we're going to New Year's. We had a good time, but really when it came down to it, tried to really, keep the wheels on the bus.
It seems like, in listening to your essay, that the wheels came off the bus for you, not because you came across some doctrine or anything like that, like this is the typical path, but the social things of the church seemed to just chip away at you. And I felt, I just from my personal experience, I felt the same way. I still had conviction, but man, it drove me nuts that if you wore something other than a white shirt, or you didn't wear a suit coat, or you had facial hair, all these things that don't have any basis in relevance to morality were so important to Mormonism. That's why I got a tattoo. That's why I always had a beard after I finally got away from BYU and could have a beard. And that's why I often didn't wear a white shirt. Just I wanted to be the edgy guy in the ward, just to show people that you could be a good Mormon and not have to be an utter conformist in every way.
Yeah, that was a big piece, and it started early on. So I went to BYU Hawaii. At Rick's, I got in trouble for hair too long. At BYU Hawaii, I got in trouble because I had a shaved head and a goatee. But I had a beard card, so I could get away with it for a period of time.
Beard card.
Yeah, that was awesome. But but then eventually I got in. You're married, you have kids, you're starting to kind of settle in, and it was. I guess the way it was for me, it was like everything is kind of a piece of one big whole. So there is the foundational pieces or the interlocking links of the framework that is the doctrine, and then it's the culture that kind of fills everything in. And so you would think that people that would worship and believe in the doctrine would be more Christ-like, and yet I was noticing that they were less Christ-like. They were judgmental. One of the things that really stuck out was why we would treat or look down on non-Mormons no matter how great they were in life, but they didn't check that box. They weren't a member, and so they're lesser citizens, and that even the worst Mormon we would give some credibility because they were LDS. It really bothered me, and that started eroding my confidence in some of the other pieces. And then the first piece of real doctrine that I was already well along the path of being jaded, but then it was, and probably Jake, it kind of connects with the Pearl of Great Price. You realize that wasn't papyrus that Joseph Smith translated from Abraham. That was just part of the Book of the Dead. It was this piece of just whatever, and then you start hearing people say, well, maybe it just inspired him, and now I'm thinking, I was like, wow. We're now adjusting the narrative around new facts. That was a big hit for me where I'm trying to, process that. And then it just started unraveling more quickly. But I would say that I was not even willing personally to look at some of those factual disconnects because I was invested in the religion and, culturally, it was making sense. But when that started to go, then the other stuff started standing out.
Yeah, there's two things that you need, or you just need one of two things to stay in the church. One, you really believe, or two, you really enjoy the Mormon culture. And when you had a very similar path to me, I never really enjoyed being Mormon. I never enjoyed the Mormon culture, but I firmly believed. But once I came across, the information that changed, started to chip away at my number 2, man, I was gone fast.
Yeah.
When I think people that really enjoy being Mormon, it's easier for them to ignore facts that they come across that are detrimental to a testimony.
I bristle and have bristled for years at being labeled Mormon because, you'd meet people, they'd see BYU on your resume. They would say, hey, you're Mormon, so you must be this.
Yeah.
And that bothered me.
Always.
And so towards the end, the last 6 years, when people say, where'd you go to college? I say, I went to college, a little private school out in Hawaii. I would completely downplay BYU because it wasn't worth those conversations, because by then, the culture was already lost on me, and I'd already started to think like, well, the word of wisdom was only from Joseph Smith's time till now. The earth goes back thousands of years. There's a lot of people in the celestial kingdom that have had a beer. So I quit worrying about that, honestly. And so then I hated that, well, they know I went to BYU and having a beer, I may have to answer it, or they're thinking it. Hated that whole juxtaposition.
I go through that now because in my job, people know I speak Japanese. And so they always ask, why do you speak Japanese? And I always hate answering that question. I usually say,
you don't want to say it.
I don't want to say I was a missionary.
Say you're a volunteer.
Volunteer, yeah. But I've recently just said, yeah, I was a Mormon missionary, and not even blinking at it. But for so long, I was just so ashamed of it. I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to have to explain it. And I felt like I had to explain it. And then I guess at some point I realized they don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't understand it the same way that we do anyway. I was recently in, I don't remember where I was, Mexico or something, and we saw a bunch of missionaries at the airport, and I was with people from work, and I said, you know who they are? They're like, no. It's so obvious to me who they are. And I started explaining to them, they weren't that interested in it. And they're like, oh yeah, this other guy who we work with, he goes on missions to India, once a year. I'm like, it's so different. It's so different. But I like Brad, I hear where you're coming from. I've always felt that embarrassment too.
Okay, so I have a question about kind of going from that perspective of somebody that doesn't really enjoy being part of the Mormon culture, or like the Mormon typical kind of Western United States Mormon culture kind of chafes them. In the thing that I've enjoyed the most about distancing myself from Mormonism is that I've opened myself up to this whole spectrum of the human experience that I wasn't open to before, and just in a lot of ways, they're and you can talk about like word of wisdom stuff, and that's usually kind of a lightning rod for that type of thing. But just all kinds of experiences that I wasn't open to before. But from your perspective, having experienced that and then going back to Mormonism, how do you view those experiences cleaning up before going to your mission? I mean, would you, if your children were doing the same thing that you were doing, is that something that you think is like, oh, that's just a normal teenage experience? Is that something that is good or bad? I don't know if that makes sense, that question.
It makes perfect sense. So my take was, the one thing I did not like is I never had dialogue with my parents. It was they wanted a certain sort of youth, this active Eagle Scout. That was a big thing. I was the only one of 5 boys that didn't get my Eagle Scout. Big thing.
Good job.
Yeah,
nice.
Right. And that's a great story that I'll save for another time. But, it was something they really struggled with. And so knowing that there was that kind of pressure, I honestly couldn't talk to them. And so I went through some rough things and did some things that probably, you wouldn't want your kids to go through or experience. But there was no way I could have reached out and said, hey, this is what's going on. I need help, because I was so worried about, the getting in trouble or the disappointment or some of those things. And so I'm thinking about, being able to be more open with my kids and say, let's talk about it. We all have to carve our own path. And I honestly feel like I'm a better person now because there's honesty in everything that I do. There's no secrets. There's no double life. I mean, in some ways, when you're living that double life, there's a lot of empathy for other people. I think of what it's like to be a closeted gay or somebody who can't be your true self around everybody. So you compartmentalize, and in some ways, people that know the secret, you're closer to than those that don't. And yet, those that didn't were the people that really you wanted to care for the most. And so it was this really weird piece where, ever since I just said, "Hey, I'm coming out," that has been a lot better, and I feel my relationships are better with people that I let in.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a nice burden to get to let go of that judgmental mentality.
Right.
But I think Jake wants to know, like, do you like pot better or mushrooms or LSD? Like, did you go back to all that stuff, or
So that's a good one. So I did. I didn't try pot again until I was out in Hawaii going to BYU, and then
and married, or this was before you met your wife?
No, I wasn't married, but I was dating my wife, and she knows. We've talked about it, but it was one of those things that the pot was very hard because I'd get so paranoid. By then you're trying to get a job, you're all, and if you can't really detach the worries of the world, don't do pot. You would just sit and obsess, and you would have this horrible time. But we would go and hike up in this pastures near the campus. You could pick mushrooms, and we would do mushrooms, right there in our apartment.
Were like natural grown out there?
Natural grown, and we'd go pick them and
that would scare me to death, man.
Why?
Because
you don't know what.
Right. Yeah, I'd be afraid. I'd be afraid that I'd ingest some poison. Like, how would you know that you're getting magic psychedelic and not just like?
Well, didn't you experience hallucinations? I mean,
sure.
Oh yeah, they got to tell them the John Lennon mop story.
I will after I finish this. So,
right.
Part of my career at BYU Hawaii, I had access to the school vehicles. I worked for the school, and so I was a social activities director, and so I'd actually be able to check out these vehicles and drive into Waikiki, and we'd go clubbing, and the school would pay for the transit to go there, and I would book bands that would later play on campus, and so we would I'd load up the bus with 10 buddies, and we'd cruise to Waikiki and party. It was awesome. So the John Lennon story. So we my first year of college, this was well before my mission, we got tinkering around with LSD and some different stuff, and we would trip quite a bit. And there was one night, Beatles was on, and I was sitting near the corner, and there was this mop head that was turned upside down. And I had this roommate who had these John Lennon-looking circular sunglasses, put them on the mop. And so, and I'm sitting there, and in my altered state, my mind starts, you knew it was a mop, but my mind starts filling in the details, and it looked like John Lennon. And so I just all of a sudden just start chit-chatting, and I'm not aware of it. And then people would walk up and say, "Who are you talking to?" I'm like, John Lennon. They're like, "Where's John?" He's like, "Right here." And they'd look and see this mop with the glasses, and we must have conversed for 20, 30 minutes, And,
did he have the proper British accent?
He did. And Glenn knows that I cannot do accents, including a
Scotty.
Yeah, Scotty or I won't even do it now, but so I won't mimic it, but in my head it played pretty well.
So the other story, because this is one that I listened to him talk about as a missionary, and it freaked me out because I didn't hang out with guys that did stuff like this, and now I'm on a mission and I'm in the same apartment with guys who were dropping acid. I was so fascinated by it, to be honest.
You asked me a lot of questions.
Oh my gosh, I was so I just wanted. I was so curious to do it, but so terrified of it at the same time. So my favorite story that you told was when you were with two of your friends and you were in the cab of a pickup truck, and you guys had all dropped acid.
4x4. Yes,
and you were in the middle, and the guy was driving. There was somebody that was on the right side, and he he just kept getting so angry at the two of you because
it started with me being on the right side.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling so ostracized. So it's a little Nissan pickup. So you're so close, your shoulders are touching. But, they were talking and looking at each other, and I'm just like, oh, I'm over here all by myself. It was just bothered. And so we pulled into a rest station, go to the bathroom, and I come out and say, I got to sit in the middle. I can't handle sitting clear on the edge. And so we switched, and we're driving, we're talking. Then all of a sudden, this guy on the outside taps on the shoulder, says, I hate being clear over here, and so literally I had to put my arms around both of them and just, we're all together, guys. And granted, we were touching the whole time, because it was a little loud.
And the way I remember you telling it, it was like you and the guy were having this great conversation, and all of a sudden you hear, man, you were right. This sucks.
Right.
Oh, I thought that was hilarious. Oh, man.
Yeah. I thought about that till you asked me about it a year or two ago, and that had completely gone.
Well, see, and when we reconnected on Facebook, I tried to ease into the whole where are you in the church conversation very easily because I didn't want to freak you out. But I wanted to know. So, do you remember how that went? Was it were you watching me the whole time, going, "I know what you're doing. I know where you're trying to go with this."
Did he change his profile pic to mushrooms or something? Is that what?
No, he didn't. So honestly, that was an interesting one. So you don't know, you're reconnecting. You don't know where that person's at. One of the things is you had that old picture of that Stephen Knutson photo.
Oh, right.
That was me.
Yeah.
Now people know my name and what I look like. So we started talking and started connecting. You came across as somebody who was starting to be disaffected, but you hid a lot of your deep doctrinal concerns. So I had no clue about that. And maybe that's what I wanted to believe because I was feeling that early on jaded by the culture, still trying to make the church work. And so I was like, Glenn's kind of like me. I remember kind of spilling out that I may have a beer every now and again or something, kind of just saying, hey, I'm not completely straight-laced, but haven't given up. And you kind of let it simmer, which, I probably wouldn't have freaked out too much, but it would have caught me as interesting because, years ago, on the mission, you never struck me as that person who would ever leave the church or go away or have concerns. You were that guy who would share all those little unique extra things that you don't really learn in seminary about, the second endowment or some of these things.
You're like your dad.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would sit there and go, maybe I've heard that, but maybe not. It was like this weird, extra dimension. And so I perceived you as this very cerebral approach to connecting the finer points of the gospel together. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, Glenn's really got it figured out. I didn't know what the Godhead is.
I did have it figured out. See, thanks, Brad.
Yeah. Right. What happened? Because honestly, I would sit in awe of just that level of detail. And maybe I never worked that hard. Maybe I never cared that much. But I would sit there and be like, man, it's like I should have gone to seminary.
And I was thinking, I wish I would have been in the cab of that truck.
Talking to John Lennon.
Right, that would have been cool. Yeah, and what's funny is I was totally doing the Mormon Expression podcast and wanted to share links to kind of put a toe in the water and see, have you listen to a couple of those and have a discussion. But I was kind of afraid to. So.
And honestly, I don't know that I would have just said, hey, that sounds right. There's a point where you have to be disaffected enough that the seed, it's like the parable of the seed, it's like if you're not really in the right frame of mind, you will dismiss that to hate speech of anti-Mormons. Right. That's your condition for that. Yeah. And until you understand that maybe there's multiple perspectives, you won't listen.
Right.
We disaffected members really need to have like a call sign or a hand signal because we're looking for each other, looking if there's a beer in the picture or if there's if someone's wearing black underwear, like, ooh, he's not wearing his garments anymore. Yeah. I got to go ask him what's going on. It's just creepy, dude.
It's always a delicate situation though, because it's like once you become disaffected, you want to find others that are from your past, like your real past, not like Facebook or anything like that. Like your real past that also are disaffected, but you're always careful, you tend to want to be careful. And a couple of times, like I reconnected with some missionaries that were just awful, rebellious missionaries on their mission. And I just assumed that they had left the church.
They didn't make it. No way.
No way, that guy. Yeah, I didn't think that guy was going to finish his mission. I mean, God. He was hooking up with the bishop's daughter kind of thing. And so, like, I reconnect with those guys and threw caution to the wind. And, man, they are as TBM as ever.
Yes.
And called me to repentance. And then we end up in this long I am debate on Mormonism. And I haven't found very many people from my past that I have found to be disaffected, like myself. So it's always this like little like feeler game. And that's what you guys are doing with each other. You guys are kind of feeling each other out, but no one was bold enough to just let it out.
Yeah, and it's true. So, I've always liked that joke, why do you take two Mormons fishing? You guys know that one, don't you?
Because if you take one, they'll drink all your beer?
Yes.
Mormon will drink all your beer, yeah.
So that was always my, so deep down, I had this theory once I started falling away that everybody kind of – nobody's letting their crazy flag out because they're worried about the judgment of the other, but it might be more common than you think. And, this last week, so at work, I'm working on this big project, and there's this other LDS fellow who called me, like I'd never met him before. He calls me like 6 months ago as we start working on this project. He's at a different site, and he finds out I'm from Eastern Washington. He is. Finds out I went to BYU. He's like, oh, we've got a lot in common. My kids are going to BYU. So all of a sudden, he's LDS, and you're just like, okay. And so the big thing was the visit happened 2 weeks ago, actually, and it was, am I going to have a cup of coffee or am I going to play the game? Am I going to, when we go out for dinner in the evening, am I going to have a beer or am I going to play the game? And it was finally, I was just like, bag it. I'm not even going to flinch. I'm going to look that guy right in the eyes, and I'm just
like your bishop.
Just like my bishop. I've trained my whole life for this moment. And honestly, he didn't. You can tell he kind of looked at me a little bit funny, but I didn't respond to it and just talked about different things. And once you get past that wrinkle, it's just like whatever. Now he has no grand expectations of who I am, and I can do this.
Nice.
And if he is disaffected, the ball's in his court now.
Yeah,
see, I reached out to an old missionary friend of mine, and he was probably the one guy on my mission that I was the closest to. And I don't know, me and him were like real close buds. And I reached out to him when I was going through all my crap. And just in blind, I was just kind of like throwing it out there like, dude, I'm really struggling. You're probably some stake present somewhere. I just wanted to let you know. And he messaged me back. He's like, dude, I left the church a while ago, but just keep that between us, will you? And because he honestly, he's like, I'm glad you're wearing your apostasy on your sleeve, Tom, but yeah, I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't tell anybody that I left the church a while ago. I was like,
what's his name, Tom?
Yeah, right.
What's his name and where does he live? Yeah. Just so we get the bishop out there.
I think Glenn's the only former missionary person that I even keep in touch with. There's a few that I'm friends with on Facebook that will ignore me, and I don't know if my crazies come through or we never really got along. It's kind of that weird thing where you connect as missionaries, you think you're really close, and you get home and you have nothing in common. You're just like, you bastards. Yeah.
You judge me, I'll judge you right back, you bastards.
Right. Ignore me, I'll ignore you. Screw you, too.
So Brad, your wife was the one that suggested that you write the essay and come on and have this discussion with us, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, so kind of. So when you first threw out, do this essay, it'd be fun to kind of connect and talk about things. I was like, yeah, it makes sense. But, I really kind of couldn't frame around what I would write about. I hadn't really finalized my position in the church. And over the last probably 6 or 8 weeks, I've I used to go and listen to the podcasts on my headphones and kind of tune out the world. My wife started giving me a little bit of grief. What you doing? You're talking to your non-Mormon friends again? I'm like, screw it. Let's listen to it together. So I started putting it out there, and she would actively listen. She would talk, and she was a convert to the church as a teenager, and. For her, it wasn't so much about the doctrine, probably some other drivers, but she never really, questioned the doctrine. But as things came up, they were like, that doesn't make sense. And then I would talk and share where I was at. And so as we listened, she's like, you going to write an essay? And just the fact that she was asking and genuinely wanted to hear was like, I think I will. So it kind of facilitated it. And, she has not listened to my essay. And I thought about showing it with her. Probably would have. But we did talk about the elements of it just the other night in bed. Just kind of, she asked me what I wrote about.
Yeah.
But
well, in case she's listening right now, Brad's wife, you are awesome.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Except, but I before you say that, Tom, she accused all of us of sounding like Utah Mormon. What was it, Brad?
She did. She's like, do they know that they all sound like Mormons?
Of course we sound like Mormons, for Christ's sake. We're all Mormons.
Except for Randy.
Well, I was a California Mormon, so, if you call me, if your wife thinks I sound like a Utah Mormon, fuck you.
What did she mean by that, Brad?
Well, and I know you guys know what I'm talking about here.
I don't.
So you listen to conference, people have this certain pronunciation, a certain cadence of their speech.
Holy crap.
And you guys have that. Yes. Which, part of it is, you just can't help it. And Glenn, you'll know this one. Have you ever noticed that when Japanese Mormons pray, like they sound like regular Japanese people, then when they pray, they sound like they learned to pray from missionaries, and they use kind of jacked up grammar, and they pause at really random times that fluent speakers wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, now it's kind of the part of the Mormon culture of Japan is to sound like a freaking missionary that's only spoken the language for 18 months when you pray.
Yeah, and then that's what the members try to emulate as the missionaries.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so you guys do that with the general authorities, apparently.
I think she's wrong. I think it's time for another survey question. We've got to put that out there for the general public, because I'm really going to consider just not doing this anymore if that's the case.
More F-bombs. That's the salt right there.
No, but if we still pronounce them like Utah Mormons, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, you got J. Golden Campbell still sounding Mormon, even though he said "son of a bitch" and all that stuff. But
at least you don't say frickin'. If you're going to say it, own the word.
Yeah, everybody knows what you mean. But I just don't. I mean, it's harder to see it in yourself, or maybe with a group of friends.
Why are you so self-conscious about it, Randy? Who gives a shit?
She said it on the third podcast. So after 3 times, she was like, they all sound like Mormons.
I'm sure she sounds just fine. So there's your judgment right there. She can judge me all she wants, but I think she's great. So
my wife is definitely the sweeter one of the two of us. Well, my wife married down.
Tom is a Utah Mormon, so he doesn't like what would be the shame of being called a Utah Mormon? The rest of us aren't. I mean, Jake kind of is. Jake's kind of half of a Utah Mormon.
Right.
I think, Glenn, you sound more Utah Mormon than most people I know.
Really? You're really trying to hurt me, aren't you?
Does that hurt, really? Who cares? I mean, Randy, the reason why he swears is because he's trying to break that stereotype off.
That's true.
No.
Yeah, I don't need to swear. My lifestyle does it for me.
Nice. Bumper sticker.
No. I have always struggled with cussing, or always struggled with cussing as a Mormon. And then when I let go of, moralizing taboo words, which I eventually came to the conclusion was silly, I just kind of let loose to the way I always wanted to talk. And then sometimes a good fuck is a good, like, it's the only word that conveys the proper emotion that you're trying to portray. And taboo words
I just want to warn you. I just want to warn you right now, Randy. You've asked me to edit out times where you're philosophizing, the like swearing here. So, are you just creating more work for me right now? Is that what we're doing?
I just edit it out. But seriously,
I don't think I'm gonna. I think I'm gonna keep this one in.
No.
Sometimes, like a motherfucker is the only word that truly represents what you're feeling at that time.
It is.
I don't know,
for me.
Randy. Have you tried a flippity flip?
Yeah, right.
It feels just as good, dude.
No, it does not, and it's scientifically proven not to feel as good.
Scientifically proven. Put on your white lab coats, everybody. Try it out.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Glenn's already told me not to give him more work. I'm not gonna get into the studies, but there's a difference in your brain when you use flip and when you use fuck.
You put more emphasis on one word. I got it.
Yeah. Well, you can't do. Your tongue can't go from the F to the L to really flip. I mean, it just doesn't work. You can't emphasize it. So, all right.
Those hard K sounds.
So, I think the only thing I want from you, Brad, before we leave, is I want to hear Ohio Gozaimasu Stormtrooper. You got to do that. You got to do it.
I won't get that.
Yeah. There you go. You're halfway there. You're halfway there.
You probably have it on audio.
You want it. You want to do it so bad.
Well, I would, but I've already thrown my name out there in the pod world. So if I say it, then they'll be like, "You're the guy with the fucked up accent."
Yeah, it's hard to perform. It's like one thing to do it spontaneously, like in a social setting. Yeah. When someone says, "Now go," it's like, I'm not a professional actor.
I do have it recorded, by the way. I can use an older copy if I have to. But it'd sound better coming from you. So Brad used to do the Darth Vader saying, "Oh." He thought it was so funny.
It was such a horrible non-impersonation of anything.
I would like to hear Darth Vader give the baptismal prayer.
Do it.
Yeah.
Nah, I don't do Darth Vader.
Oh, I don't know. I could think of a few scenarios where Randy would do Darth Vader. I'm too sexy for my love. Too sexy for my love. Love's going to leave. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of Infants on Thrones. I want to remind you to come by and visit our website. We're going to be putting up a new survey just for the fun of it. We just like to hear from you, and that's been a cool way to do it in the past. So even if you filled out the last one, stop by infantsonthrones.com and take a minute to fill it out. This one will be a little different. And thank you to those of you who went to iTunes last week and gave us your 5-star ratings. We're now at 74 ratings and 46 reviews. Not bad. But I gotta say, there are about 1,200 of you who listened to these episodes within the first week. So last week, 10 of you actually went to iTunes and made your mark, but I think we can do better. So to try to make it worth your while, once we get to 100 ratings, we're gonna throw a pizza party. The best written review gets to choose the toppings, and the worst written review has to give the prayer. Which reminds me, Canned Olivia, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Anyone for the closing prayer?
Enjoy it, Randy. That one's for you.
Napped out, I was out of my head. I was so wasted.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.
I was so